Good afternoon. We're letting the attendees into the meeting, so we'll just give it a few moments so everyone can enter the meeting. And I do believe everyone has now entered the meeting, so we'll go ahead and begin with it being just approaching a minute after 4:30. So good afternoon and welcome to Maricopa County's public comment meetings on Maricopa County's role within redistricting and reprecincting. Every 10 years after the decennial census, jurisdictions nationwide go through redistricting efforts to redraw boundaries for local government, state government, and all levels of government to redraw their boundaries and various different voting districts. And Maricopa County and Arizona is no different. Today, we will be focusing on Justice Court, some proposed Justice Court reprecincting changes and voting precincting changes that the Board of Supervisors will be considering at a public comment meeting at their special Board of Supervisors meeting on September 27th, later this month. We'll be focusing specifically on changes that are in Board of Supervisor District 5. That encompasses the cities of Guadalupe, Tempe, Phoenix, portions of Glendale, portions of Goodyear, Avondale, portions of Tolleson, all the way down to our Southwest Valley, which would include Gila Bend as well. This is our 5th public comment meeting. In our prior comment meetings, we covered Board of Supervisor districts 1 through 4, which include the rest of Maricopa County. So before we get started, I do want to go over a few housekeeping rules and also really encourage you all to participate in this public comment meeting by asking questions and providing comments. We'll be providing other options throughout the presentation on how you can give us your input into these public comment meetings. Your input is very valuable. We have statisticians, we have GIS techs, we have experts in the field that can crunch numbers and identify some potential changes on the different criteria that we establish and criteria that's set up in statute. But your input is coming from the community. And there are things that we may overlook, and we want to incorporate your input into this process and make sure that, that any feedback or any concerns that you have are considered as we go through and present these proposed changes to the Board of Supervisors, and they then consider their approval. And now for a few housekeeping items. So the meeting is being recorded. All attendees are muted and their videos are off. This is to help keep us on time. We have a lot of information to cover tonight, and we want to make sure that we can get through it all. If you do have a comment or a question, please use Zoom's chat feature or type your comment in as a question in the chat feature. We'll be responding to these questions and comments throughout the presentation. We'll be typing responses, as well as then some of our staff that are assisting with the presentation will then be reading some of those questions to us, and then we'll respond verbally. If you are joining us by phone, that doesn't mean that you can't participate. You can send your email, or you can send a question to us to our email at voterinfo@risk.maricopa.gov. That's voterinfo@risk.maricopa.gov, voterinfo@risk.maricopa.gov. And while we won't be able to respond in real time to those questions or comments, you will get a response from us via email with any questions that you have. We will be posting this recording on our website later this week, and as well as all of the public comment meetings. And it will be on the website where you registered for this meeting. There will be a little link with the presentation as well as the video recording. And now I want to, before you go any further, I want to turn it over to Selena Olivias Iglesias. She's our bilingual community outreach coordinator, and she's going to provide this same intro for our Spanish-speaking attendees. Selena, are you available?
Yes, Scott, I'm here.
Great.
Bienvenidos y gracias por asistir a las reuniones públicas de redistribución del condado Maricopa. Después del censo, el cual se realiza cada 10 años, las entidades responsables de evaluar los límites de los distritos deben comenzar a redistribuir sus esfuerzos a nivel federal, estatal y local. Hoy vamos a discutir el papel que desempeña el condado Maricopa al rediseñar las líneas de distritos y recintos y revisar a detalle los cambios que la Junta de Supervisores considerará para los recintos electorales y recintos del Tribunal de Justicia. A medida que la Junta evalúa estos cambios propuestos, el condado ha establecido una serie de reuniones públicas y un sitio web público para solicitar aportaciones del público. Las observaciones y aportaciones recibidas en estos foros de comentarios públicos serán considerados ante esfuerzos de redistribución de distritos y recintos. El enfoque de la reunión de hoy detallará principalmente los cambios propuestos en el recinto electoral y Tribunal de Justicia que se están considerando dentro de los límites del Distrito 5 de la Junta de Supervisores. Y antes de iniciar esta junta, cubriré la parte logística de la reunión. Esta reunión está siendo grabada y será publicada en línea la próxima semana en la página en la cual ustedes se registraron para asistir a esta junta, la cual es Redistribución.Maricopa.Vote. Si tiene algún comentario o pregunta, por favor, use la función de chat de Zoom para escribir su comentario o pregunta. Responderemos a estas preguntas y comentarios a lo largo de la presentación. También puede enviar un comentario en línea en redistribución.maricopa.vote o bien puede enviar un correo electrónico a la página voterinfo@risc.maricopa.gov. Gracias.
Thank you, Selena. So today we will be covering in our agenda a brief welcome to some of the speakers that will be providing some of the information at today's presentation. We'll also be covering Maricopa County's role in the broader redistricting effort. We'll be going over what is reprecincting. We'll provide a brief overview of our public input or our website, how it functions, the different information that you can obtain from the website, how you can provide feedback, and how you can use that website to get information about reprecincting in general. Then we'll be going into detail about our justice court methodology. We have our presiding judge and another judge, Judge Keith Russell, here with us today to go over that methodology. We'll be going over in detail how we made decisions about making recommendations for voting precincting changes. And then we'll go into detail about each individual change through these exhibits that highlight those changes that are occurring in Board of Supervisor District 5. And then we'll recap with some questions and answers and review those. So I do want to provide a great welcome to Presiding Judge Anna Uberman. She is the Justice of the Peace in the Country Meadows Precinct, where she has served since 2012 when the Board of Supervisors created the Country Meadows Justice Court. The Justices of the Peace in Maricopa County elected Judge Uberman to serve as the presiding Justice of the Peace, and her term in that leadership position began on July, just a few months ago. Prior to her election to the bench, Judge Uberman served as a court interpreter with the Maricopa County Superior Court for 15 years. Judge Uberman, do you have any opening remarks for us?
Thank you, Scott. Good evening, everyone. I just want to start off by saying that the process of looking into these changes to the precincts began early this year. And with the help of our stellar staff in court administration who helped evaluate the caseloads in each court and map the JPCs by voting precincts, we were able to propose solutions to even out the workload between neighboring courts as much as possible. I'd like to give a special thanks to Recorder Richard's staff who assisted us every step of the way. A lot of time and effort has been put into this project by our then presiding judge, Keith Russell, and court administrator, Jim Morrow. They work closely with the presiding constable, Mike Branham, and our operations team. They came up with a plan, made regional presentations of their suggestions, had individual conversations with the judges and constables. They ran and reran the numbers as other suggestions were proposed. By the time I was elected presider, most of the decisions and agreements were already in place. Myself and our new court administrator, Chris Reams, are extremely grateful for their dedication and hard work on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Huberman. Next, I want to introduce Judge Keith Russell. He is Justice of the Peace in the East Mesa Precinct, where he has served since 2013. The Justices of the Peace in Maricopa County elected Judge Russell to serve as the presiding judge or Justice of the Peace in 2017 and again in 2019. He completed his term in that leadership position in June. Prior to taking the bench, Judge Russell served as the Maricopa County Assessor, having first been elected in 2004 and then re-elected in 2008 and 2012. Judge Russell, do you have any opening remarks for us?
Thank you, Scott. I have some thank yous that I'd also like to share. I need to say thank you to Chairman Sellers of the Board of Supervisors for working with us on this project. We appreciate his leadership and his staff's assistance in getting this project underway. Recorder Richer and all of his people who have helped us, a big thank you. They have been wonderful to work with. The folks you get to work with, Scott, you've got a good job because you get to work with good people. I want to say thank you to all of our JPs, Justices of the Peace, and the constables who we've worked with. It has not been historically, this has not historically been an easy task. And the truth is that group of elected officials made it much easier this cycle than probably it has been in the past. And I'm grateful for their participation, their involvement. Finally, I feel like I need to say thank you to Ginger Rodas and Charlie Barrett. Ginger and Charlie have done a lot of the behind the scenes work in the justice courts, crunching numbers, making calculations, getting statistical information for questions from our judges and JPs, as well as Judge Huberman and myself. We are very fortunate to have Ginger and Charlie working in the justice courts. They're a great asset for us. So thank you, everybody, for everything that's led up to this process. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Judge Russell. And I echo your comments about the team coming together and really giving us all the information, doing the analysis for these proposed changes. And I hope the public through this meeting will see that effort at work. And before we move on, I also now want to introduce Supervisor Steve Gallardo. He is the Board Supervisor for District 5. He was born in Phoenix, Arizona. He is a fourth-generation Arizona native. In 2002, Supervisor Gallardo was elected to the State House of Representatives representing the Southwest Valley, and in 2010 was elected to the State Senate. Supervisor Gallardo has also served on the Cartwright Elementary School District Governing Board and sits on the Phoenix Union High School District Governing Board. Supervisor Gallardo is the current president of the County Supervisors Association. So Supervisor Gallardo, do you have any opening remarks for us?
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Just real quickly, just want to thank everyone for all the work that they have gone into reshuffling some of our justice and of course our precinct lines as well. Just great work put in. I know there's a lot of time and effort goes in. It's not an easy task at all. So I want to thank everyone there and just the general public. Thank you for participating in this very important discussion. I know this comes along every 10 years where we have to sit down and relook at our precinct lines and our justice court lines and get hopefully public input and their thoughts and opinions. It's part of the process. It's part of our electoral process. So I just thank everyone for their participation. Thank you, Scott. I thank you to all the judges. Judge Uberman, thank you so much. Mr. Russell, thank you so much once again as well. You all have done a great job. I know it's not an easy task. I've been in these discussions before, but when very smart people come together, good things happen, and that's what you have in front of us. So thank you so much for your work, and thank you, Scott, for being part of this discussion here in District 5. Turn it right back over to you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gallardo. And now I'm going to turn it over to Megan Gilbertson, who's going to give us an overview of our public comment website and how individuals can provide us input. And as I stated in my opening comments and as Supervisor Gallardo mentioned, your input is really valuable to us. We've already received many comments through our website, and we're currently going through and evaluating those and providing that input to the Board of Supervisors. So there is still time and opportunity to provide us that input. And Megan will provide you an overview of the most efficient way to get us that input and feedback. Are you ready, Megan?
Yes, thank you, Scott. Voters can find information about Maricopa County's reprecincting at Reprecincting.Maricopa.Vote. On this website, you'll be able to access a lot of the historic maps and compare those to the proposed maps that we're going to be going into greater detail for District 5 today. In addition, there's information about the methodology, and it provides a place where you can give specific public comments or general public comments, depending on what information you want the Board of Supervisors to consider. The second tab is a tab specifically about voting or justice court precincts. There, you can also access the historic justice court precinct maps, as well as the proposed maps that the judges are going to go into further detail today. In addition, you can also provide your public comments specifically on the justice court precinct proposed changes in this section as well. The last tab is the public meetings tab, which is most likely how you registered today. But Scott had mentioned that we're going to be posting this recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation, and you'll be able to find that right here on this public meetings page. Lastly, I wanted to point out that this website is also available in Spanish, and you'll be able to go through the same information and get the same information on voting precincts, justice court precincts, and the public information section as well. And with that, Scott, I'll give it back to you.
Great, thank you, Megan. Let me bring back up the presentation. Can you see it, Megan?
Yes, I can, Scott.
Great, thank you. So now we'll talk about what Maricopa County's role is in the broader redistricting efforts. So many of you may be familiar with the Independent Redistricting Commission. It was actually a citizens initiative that was established an independent effort to redraw our congressional and legislative district lines in 2000. I believe it was Prop 106. And they established an article in our Arizona Constitution, Article 4, Part 2, Section 1, that tasked the Independent Redistricting Commission with drawing those boundaries. And those congressional boundaries, so those are our U.S. House of Representatives. There's currently 9 congressional district boundaries in Arizona. And because Maricopa County takes up the largest portion of the state's population, right now we represent well over 60% of the population, 8 of those congressional district boundaries overlap Maricopa County. They also are tasked with drawing the legislative districts. So that will be our state senators as well as our state representatives that represent us. There are currently 30 districts in Arizona, and 20 of those overlap Maricopa County boundaries. So because of the delayed census data, so typically the census releases their data in January, February of an odd year. So in 2021, we're in an odd year. However, due to the pandemic, they did not release their data till late August. So that's really put a tight crunch and a timeline crunch on all of the entities that will be doing redistricting. But the IRC is still planning to be able to give us the data that we would need by late December or early January, so we can incorporate that information into our mapping systems. So, and then Maricopa County uses that data along with information that the county will coordinate, and as it goes through and updates its Board of Supervisors lines, which the community college district as well as the special healthcare districts traditionally follow those lines within the Board of Supervisors, as well as other districts. So those would be our local cities and towns, some school districts that are doing their re-precincting. As far as the Board of Supervisor lines, that there was, because of the delay in the census data, the legislature recognized that the Board of Supervisors, this isn't Maricopa County specific, this is all counties within the state of Arizona, needed that additional time to be able to evaluate the lines that were being drawn by the local jurisdictions, what the Independent Redistricting Commission would release, to evaluate that information before updating the Board of Supervisor lines. So they set a deadline, or traditionally it would have been December 1st of 2021. They extended that until July 1st of 2022. And then once those Board of Supervisors lines are updated, in which they'll need to be reevaluated based on any decennial census and that new population data, that will occur on or before July 1st, 2022. And then those would go into effect on January 2nd, 2024, right before the next presidential election cycle. The 6 cities and towns that are going through redistricting currently right now, that includes the city of Phoenix, the city of Surprise, city of Peoria, city of Mesa, city of Glendale, and the city or the town of Buckeye. And they're all doing their analysis to identify potential changes that they will be making to their city council districts. There's also 3 schools, the Phoenix Union School District, and then we have the EVIT, so the East Valley Institute of Technology, as well as the West Mex districts. Those are special districts that will be evaluating their lines as well during this time frame. And we're expecting anything that those cities and towns and those school districts update their boundaries by mid to late December to early January. So right now we are considering this part as part of phase 1 of Maricopa County's role in redistricting, which is to evaluate the precincts for the justice courts as well as the voting precincts. We'll enter into phase 2 when we get that information from the Independent Redistricting Commission, as well as these other cities and districts. The board will have to consider any potential changes to those voting precincts based on information we receive from the IRC and those cities and towns. And that could mean that there would be a few changes that we have to make to voting precincts. So state statute currently requires that a voting precinct can't overlap one or more legislative districts, can't overlap one or more congressional districts. So there will have to be a point in time where we evaluate those changes and then get updates and approvals to those new voting precincts in late January, early February. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Justice Court judges, so Judge Uberman, to talk through the methodology that the Justice Courts considered as they made and evaluated potential changes to the Justice Court precincts.
All right, thank you, Scott. So we have 26 justice courts in Maricopa County, 25 are full-time courts, and the Ironwood Justice Court, which is part-time. Our judges and administration have been aware for some time now of issues with our current precinct lines that have created an imbalance in the workload among our courts. As you will hear in the recorder's portion this evening, the basis in determining voting precinct lines is population. But for justice court precincts, it's JPCs. So we should start by explaining what judicial productivity credits are. Justice courts hear 7 types of cases. Those different case types generate different amounts of work, both for the judge and for the staff, depending on many, many different factors. And the case types vary from court to court based on geography and boundaries. Some courts may have more seasonal work because they have lakes or rivers. Some courts have more freeways, which create more criminal traffic cases. Some courts have more apartment complexes, which translates into more evictions. Although there could be different metrics to measure work in the justice courts, the legislature has settled on JPCs. JPCs assign a value to each case type filed in each court. Those values are legislated in statute. ARS 22-125. 22-125 also provides that judicial salaries are determined by the total judicial productivity credits. But what interests us here today is subsection H, which establishes that a justice court precinct shall not exceed 1,200 JPCs. If it does, the County Board of Supervisors shall create sufficient courts, meaning they could add a new court or redraw the justice court precinct boundaries. Our proposal today is to redraw the lines. Next slide. As you will see later, the workload across the different courts in the county is very imbalanced. We have 2 courts that currently exceed the 1,200 JPCs described in the statute. What everyone should understand is that the JPC number may sound small or smallish, but they actually represent thousands of cases in court. Although constables are elected in the same precincts as the justice of the peace, the constable workload is not driven by JPCs and may be more difficult to measure. Constable work is higher in precincts with high evictions, such as Country Meadows and Manistee. Among other things, constables serve orders of protection on defendants that reside in the constable's precinct, regardless of which judge issued the order. Next slide. Taking into account the total workload in the county, a perfect balance would be 900 JPCs per court. In this graph, the green section shows the courts that are currently between 800 and 1,000 JPCs. As you can see, we currently have 9 courts in the low range of JPCs, 2 of those under 700. 7 courts are in the high range, 2 of those over 1,200. I will now turn it over to Judge Keith Russell.
Thank you, Judge Uberman. This map shows most of Maricopa County, and it delineates our 26 justice courts as well as the 5 Board of Supervisors districts. Again, we're talking about district number 5, which is in the lower part of the map. You'll see see it denoted as District 5. And it includes a number of our courts. We'll list those in just a second, but you can see from the map that some of our courts encompass large geographical areas. Some are substantially smaller, but the size of the court, as Judge Uberman was talking about, is really quantified based upon those JPCs, or judicial productivity credits, that we were talking about. Now, the proposed changes that we're going to talk about here are noted on this map by dotted lines and brighter colors. And we're going to actually give you the conclusion of our analysis with this slide, but then we're going to talk about the process in which we use to come up with these conclusions. In District 5, we have primarily 10 different justice courts. These include the Ironwood, the White Tanks, Country Meadows, Maryvale, West McDowell, Encanto, Downtown, South Mountain, and the Kyrene Court. There's a total of 4 sets of different changes that we're going to walk our way through. The first one is in the Ironwood Court, which is located in the lower left part or southwest part of your map. The bright blue area is being proposed to go from the White Tanks Court, which is located just north and east of Ironwood, to the Ironwood Court. Ironwood, as Judge Huberman mentioned, is a part-time court, and the White Tank Court is one of our busier courts that we have of our 26. So with this move from the bright blue area into the Ironwood Court, it will help with the White Tanks Court's workload, or JPCs, and reduce it in the neighborhood of approximately, and all of these numbers are approximately a reduction of 100 JPCs. The next set of changes we want to talk about are with the Country Meadow Court. Country Meadow is located in the more whitish area of the map. It has 3 sets of changes. 2 are actually outside of District 5, or inside of District 5, and 1 is outside of District 5. On the Country Meadows area in its northwest boundary, there's an area that's proposed to go to the Arrowhead Court, which is inside District 4. This is the darker purple area. The other proposed changes are located in the southeast area of Country Meadows. The darker green area is proposed to go to the Agua Fria Court, and the darker blue area going to the Maryvale Court. Again, both of these changes are located in Supervisory District 5. These proposed changes to Country Meadows will reduce the JPCs by approximately 380 JPCs. The Manistee Court is located just northeast of the Country Meadows Court, and it is our second busiest justice court based on JPCs. Manistee is shown as the pink area. It has proposed changes in its northwest corner with the Arrowhead Court. Those are denoted by the darker purple areas. And in its southeast area with West McDowell, this is the darker light blue area. And the last change is to Manistee, is located in its northeast corner, and this is with the North Valley Court. That area that's proposed to change is a darker orange area. All of these moves again are reflected on the maps by dotted lines with slightly darker colored areas for the 3 receiving courts. The net effect for Manistee and their caseload, or JPCs, is approximately 240 JPCs. Now, the Country Meadow and the Manistee, I've told you, are our 2 busiest courts. We're talking a little over 600 JPCs, but it has been estimated in actual cases that these changes will account for approximately 7,000 cases going from these 2 justice courts to the surrounding courts, as we just articulated. So you can see the impact for the work in both Country Meadows and Manistee can be material. And we do need to say thank you. Judge Huberman is the judge in the Country Meadows Court. Judge Watts is the judge in the Manistee Court. These 2 courts have carried a very heavy caseload for the last number of years. The last change that we're going to talk about is our probably most complicated change. The changes actually occur outside of District 5, but it is proposed to one of the courts located within District 5. And the other 2 courts are on the edge of District 5. The downtown Justice Court is located in District 5, and it's shaded in the beige area. It's giving some voting precincts to the Arcadia Biltmore Court, which is located to its north. And the Arcadia Biltmore Court is exchanging some areas with the McDowell Mountain Court, which is located north and east of Arcadia Biltmore, and it's shaded in the light blue. McDowell Mountain has our lowest JP counts of all of our full-time courts. So the Arcadia Biltmore is proposing to move the dark blue area to McDowell Mountain. McDowell Mountain is proposed to move the slightly darker green area located directly north of the dark blue area to Arcadia Biltmore. And then the downtown court is giving an area to Arcadia Biltmore. This is shown in the slightly darker green area on the west side of the darker blue area. The net change to JPCs for Arcadia Biltmore is a loss of approximately 15 JPCs. But for the McDowell Mountain, the change is an increase of approximately 160 JPCs. And for the downtown court, it is a loss of JPCs of approximately 145. It should be noted that the downtown court is currently at the upper end of the target range, and this move will keep them within the target range, just at a lower point within that range. Let's go to the next slide if we can. This map shows just District 5. And you can see the justice courts that we were talking about, but you'll also notice white lines within each one of those justice court areas. Those are denoted as the current voting precincts that are the building blocks to build those justice courts geographical areas. If we can go to our next slide, please. So we talked about the conclusion of the analysis. Now let's talk about the process of the analysis. So the solution, we needed to make an adjustment, as Judge Uberman talked about, to balance the workloads in our courts. The statutes in ARS 22101A provide the solution, and it empowers the Board of Supervisors to either form, change, or abolish justice courts. And as Judge Uberman indicated earlier, what we're proposing is simply changes. We're not adding or deducting any courts, but we're modifying those boundary lines. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we needed to find a way to measure these proposed changes. COVID and the pandemic have created problems in all sorts of areas, including this analysis. So during the pandemic, our caseloads have been down, particularly in the areas of eviction and traffic citations. But we do expect, as the pandemic subsides over time, for our caseloads to return to a more normal level. So what we did is we actually took calendar year 2019. It was the first full, or the most recent full year not impacted by the pandemic, and we use this as our baseline. So the numbers that we've been talking about, the numbers you may see on other maps, are based upon the court's activity in 2019. Now, we do understand Maricopa County continues to grow, but the relationship between these numbers and the different courts, we believe, still is a good indication of how we can measure for these proposed changes. So if we go to our next slide, please. The goal of the analysis was to balance our top 5 high courts as far as volumes, workloads, and the lower courts, and to, when there was an opportunity, make minor adjustments in some of the other courts that may be able to be helpful for the constituents, for example, to get to a court building or to reflect other geographical considerations. Let's go to our next slide. And I think this is Judge Huberman's again. Thank you.
Thank you. So to achieve the goals that Judge Russell was just speaking about, we had to consider the certain parameters. We had to draw our lines along voting precinct lines. Voting precincts cannot be split into more than one justice court precinct. The second part of today's presentation deals with changes to voting precinct lines. Some of our lines will end up changing in accordance to the changes proposed by the Recorder's Office. Most of our courts reside in co-located facilities, so the court building itself cannot be in each individual court's precinct, but it should be in the precinct of one of the courts, preferably centrally located, For the standalone courts, the courts that don't share a building, it was important to make sure that the location of the courthouse remained in the precinct, as well as the home of both elected officials, so they don't get drawn out of their precinct. Next slide. Once we identified the courts with the highest and lowest JPCs, we looked at the adjoining precincts where adjustments could be made. The objective was to find an equitable solution for all the courts and elected officials involved to try to get all the courts to between 800 and 1,000 JPCs. Once again, I must commend Judge Russell and Constable Branham in working with all of the elected officials to come up with a solution that everyone could agree with. I would also like to thank the judges and constables who agreed to add precincts, adding to their caseload to allow the highest JPC courts relief. Next slide. Our statistician was able to break up the JPC data down to the voting precinct level. This allowed us to look for the most obvious boundary adjustments between higher and lower JPC adjoining precincts. We tried to minimize complex adjustments involving more than 2 courts. And if the more obvious or simple adjustments were not viable, we tried to employ common sense in the moves. We were very fortunate to be able to keep the boundary lines adjustments to adjoining precincts in all but one situation. For example, even though our 2 highest JPC courts, Country Meadows and Manistee, share a boundary, we were able to adjust their boundary lines with other adjoining courts whose JPCs were at the lower end of the spectrum. The one more complicated move was adjusting McDowell Mountain upward. And as Judge Russell explained before, we didn't have an obvious choice from an adjoining precinct. And so we did the 3-court move, which was moving from downtown into Arcadia and then Arcadia into McDowell Mountain. So in a matter of speaking, this 3-way move allowed JPCs from downtown to be moved into McDowell Mountain. Next slide. Here you can see what the expected balance will look like. As you can see, except for a few exceptions, all courts will fall between the 800 and 1,000 JPCs, which was our goal. Ironwood is our part-time court, which is why their JPC numbers are so much lower. After this plan was finalized and agreed to, we did realize that some of the changes proposed by the Elections Department to voting precincts would affect some of our numbers. Most of the changes are minimal and shouldn't have a huge impact on any court, but the final numbers might be a little different than what you see on this chart. And with that, if there are no further questions, I will turn it back to Scott Jarrett from the Election Department.
Megan, do we have any questions for Judge Uberman or Judge Russell?
Not at this time.
Great, thank you, Megan. So for the next portion of the presentation, we'll be going into our methodology for determining potential changes to voting precincts. And you may be asking, what are voting precincts and why are they important? Well, voting precincts are established in state statute under 16-411. And they're very important to the Elections Department and our building and preparing for an election. Essentially, they serve as the foundation and the building blocks for that election. Everything from our warehouse and logistics teams for how we route vehicles and how we identify potential building packets and kits to send to different voting locations. They also help us determine where and how we'll be sending out our sample ballots to voters. They also determine voter rotation, our candidate rotation on the ballots themselves. They help us determine what is on a voter's ballot. It's actually the different districts that determine what candidates are on a ballot. But in Maricopa County, we have many, many different ballot styles. In the last August primary election in 2020, we had over 15,000 different ballot styles. And what guides us in ensuring that we have the correct information on each voter's ballot is the voting precinct and how we use that information. Voting precincts are also very valuable to the political parties themselves. It's how we elect precinct committeemen, and then those precinct committeemen, as well as the legislative district chairs, use this information at the precinct level for get out the vote efforts. So during an election cycle, we publish information, we provide it to the parties about who's requested an early ballot, who's returned an early ballot. And those parties can then use that information to actually go and help contact voters and remind them that they have their ballot still in their possession and that they can return that ballot. And then we also use the precincts to report results. In Maricopa County, because we are so large, that does result in our full official canvas being over 10,000 pages, but you can drill down to each individual precinct and see how that precinct voted for each contest that was on that ballot. So it's an immense amount of very valuable information. So as we went about determining how we would go and update any precincts and determining which precincts potentially needed some changes, we set out some goals and priorities. And those fall into 4 different areas. First was to ensure that we could provide a smooth in-person voting experience. And we do that by limiting the size of the voting precincts themselves by the number of registered voters. We'll go into more detail on that in a minute. We also wanted to ensure that we're creating sufficient voting precincts to support those in-person voting options. We wanted to make sure that voting precincts weren't cutting through homes, buildings, apartment complex. So when we last updated these voting precincts in 2018, because of the tremendous growth in Maricopa County, there were some boundaries that were cutting through homes that didn't exist in that 2018 map. And then we wanted to make any adjustments to align voting precincts to any changes that the justice courts were considering and proposing. So by the numbers, we last updated, as I just mentioned, voting precincts in 2018. Prior to that, it was in 2012. As Megan showed us, you can see those prior maps on our website. So we are considering a total of 133 changes to voting precincts countywide. So that breaks down into 73 changes where we have voters, over 5,000 voters in those precincts. Due to the tremendous amount of growth in Maricopa County, we do have some voting precincts that are now over 10,000 total voters. And just to put the perspective of the amount of growth in Maricopa County, we've undergone over 600,000 new residents have either moved or increased the population of Maricopa County since 2010. In the whole state of Arizona, there was 760,000 a total increase in residents in Arizona, and in Maricopa County, that makes up 80% of that total increase. So there are 32 instances or changes related to a voting precinct that is cutting through a home or a building. There's actually 16 instances, but every time you make a change to address that when a line is going through a home, it results in 2 changes, one to both precincts. That's cutting through the home. So that creates 32 changes. And then there's 40 changes related to aligning a voting precinct with the justice courts. Now, if you add up those 3 categories, you actually get more than 133 total changes. It totals 145. And the reason that is because some of these changes are included in multiple categories. We might be making a change due to voter growth as well as a precinct cutting through a home. So that's why we've categorized them multiple times. So in 2018, we have 748 total precincts. In 2021, we're recommending 834. So that would be an addition of 86 new precincts. And if the board approves these and approves the changes at its meeting on September 27th, they will go into effect on January 2nd, 2022. We wanted to show a countywide map. So what this map is demonstrating or showing is the precincts that are in green are the ones that we're recommending a change. The precincts that are in blue, we're recommending no changes. And you can see that the vast majority of the changes that we're recommending are in the far West Valley or the far Southeast Valley. And most of those changes are due to population growth and the numbers of voters in those precincts exceeding 5,000 total voters. For the central corridor, so that'd be District 3, which is in the north, includes the majority of northern Phoenix, and also in District 5, many of the changes in these districts are being driven by alignments to the Justice Court precincts. And in specific for District 5, we're recommending that there are 22 total changes. So out of the 133 countywide, there are 22. So there are not a lot of changes. It's really a few small tweaks. And those 22 break down into, there are 6 instances, or 6 changes related to a voting precinct cutting through a home. So 3 homes or 3 buildings, or 3 instances where it may be multiple homes in each instance. But it's a situation where a voting precinct is cutting through a home or building, and that's resulting in 6 changes. It's 10 instances to align a voting precinct to the Justice Court precinct changes, and then 8 that are related to population growth. With that, we are going to actually show our exhibits, and I'm going to invite Gary Bellotta, our Director of GIS, or Geographical Information Systems, to join me as we detail these changes for District 5. So I'm going to bring up the voting exhibits. I think I'm actually on the first one. So Gary, can you see the exhibits?
I can, Scott.
Is that a good size?
It looks good. I think you had it a little bit larger in the previous view. Not sure if you're able to
Let's see.
do that again.
Can't see all the information if I make it any larger than this.
I see.
So what we're showing here is an exhibit for a change to a voting precinct. And there are 2 images, an image on the left and an image on the right. So the image on the left demonstrates or shows the current voting precinct as it was drawn and approved in 2018. The image on the right shows the proposed changes to those voting precincts. The image on the left will either be green or red, that shows the current precinct that we're focusing on. In this instance, it's the Balls precinct. The image on the right will show a light yellow or tannish color, which will show the current precinct and what we're proposing. It also then in the bottom left-hand corner of the exhibit describes the reason for the change. And this one says to align the precincts to draft Justice Court precincts. So here we're talking about the Balls precinct, and this impacts 2 different justice courts, the Arcadia Biltmore Justice Court, as well as the Downtown Justice Court. And the primary change here is really right there toward the western portion of the Balls precinct. And it's to take the Gateway precinct, so it involves 2 different precincts, the Balls and the Gateway precinct. And it's to extend that line that's going diagonally through the Balls and Gateway precinct to make it straighter and go up all the way to the far northwest corner of that precinct. Gary, can you describe why we've taken that angle and taken it all the way up to that northwest corner?
Yeah, so we're matching what the justice courts are doing, and we're going along. There's a canal right there. So, a lot of times we like to take canals as boundaries, kind of logical dividers between things. Similarly, and we'll probably go through this in some of the other slides, is we like to take major roads, highways where we can, but canals are also other options. So we're not splitting neighborhoods. And in this instance, there's only 1 voter being affected here.
So that's a good point, Gary. So when the GIS team is doing their analysis and identifying opportunities for changes, they like to draw any changes or the voting precincts along major thoroughfares, so major roads. They take into account mountains, other geographical factors that may pose obstacles to voters to try to identify the most obvious choice potentially for a change. And in this instance, it was a canal that seemed best to draw that line across. And this voting precinct is in Phoenix. It's right where the Loop 202 and State Route 143 connect, as you can see on this map. So here in the heart and central part of Phoenix. So any other changes here, Gary, you think we should talk about?
No, that's the only one, just that little corner on the left side.
Okay, and there will be another exhibit that describes the same change for the Gateway Precinct. So the next precinct we'll be covering is the Cashon Precinct. And this change is due to increases in population growth and the number of registered voters. Cashon is located in Tolleson. At the closest cross streets are 99th Avenue and Buckeye. Cashon currently has 6,954 voters, or that was as of early August. And what we're recommending is actually to create an additional precinct from Cashon. So Cashon will still then be on the current precinct here, as you see in the northern part or the north part of this red portion of the precinct. And to leave Cashon in the western portion of the precinct, and then create the Dos Rios precinct, which would then run through Buckeye Road to Lower Buckeye and 99th Avenue on the western portion or edge and 83rd Avenue on the eastern portion. And what that would do for the total number of voters is it would take Cashon from that 6,954 to 4,300 under our 5,000 total voter benchmark. And then Dos Rios would have 2,649 total voters. There's a few other changes down below Forest Grove, and we'll talk about those when we get to Stump Precinct. But any other changes here, Gary?
No other changes, but I did want to mention, the Dos Rios one had a little over 2,000 voters, and there's a lot of room for growth there. So some of these voting precincts we take a look at, they'll be lower than our, well below our 5,000 threshold, because we're expecting more voters to move in there and more subdivisions to be built.
And that would be here on the west side of that Dos Rios precinct.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then for those instances where there's growth, can you talk briefly about how you can, in some instances, identify future streets, proposed plots, those types of things that will also help guide you as you make decisions on proposing a new boundary?
For sure. So we get from the cities and towns and the County Planning and Development Department, we get plat maps early on, sometimes 6, 9 months, maybe a year out, even before anything's even built. So we put those into our spatial database so we can see what's going to happen, at least in the short range, within a year, maybe 2, because it'll take still some time to start building out all those homes, those subdivisions. We also have the parcel layer from the assessor's office. And a lot of times, like on the west side of Dos Rios here, that may be 2 large parcels. And a single developer may purchase one of the parcels and another developer will purchase another one of the parcels. And so when we see things like that, we kind of take an educated guess that they will stay within that parcel. So if we draw a new voting precinct, we'll do it along the parcel boundary. And, in some cases, that's not always true, but in a lot of cases it is. And so that helps us guide where to put these boundaries.
So it really are trying to look forward to prevent a future situation where these boundaries would cut through a home or a building or apartment complex. And the GIS team can do a fairly good job of forecasting that, but not always, because those plots could change. That are those street lines that are currently proposed may end up being updated, but they at least take that information to account and can prevent that from happening in a majority of cases. So for the next precinct we'll be covering is the Chitand Precinct. And this is also due to population growth. This is located in Levine. There's been a lot of population growth within District 5 down into the south portion of District 5. The closest cross streets are 51st Avenue and Baseline. And here, Chitand was following from Southern Avenue to Dobbins Road, along 43rd Avenue to the east and 51st Avenue to the west. So it covered actually almost 2 full square blocks. And what we're recommending is to split Chitand Precinct into 2 and create a new precinct, which would be Ellis Precinct. And Ellis would take the northern portion of the precinct. Chitand would take the southern portion of the current precinct. And Chitand's current total number of registered voters was 6,046. This change would take that to 2,566. Then Ellis would be 3,488. Is there any room for potential growth here still in these precincts, Gary?
There is room for growth. There's got, as I kind of mentioned in the previous slide, we draw in our street center lines before all of the houses are built. And so in this case, this is one of those cases where we do have the street center lines and there are houses being built, but they are not all built yet. So these, there is still room for growth and these will build out even larger than current totals.
Thank you, Gary. So the next precinct that we're recommending a change is for the Desert Sky Precinct. And this is located in Phoenix, and it's 75th Avenue and McDowell are the closest cross streets. And we're recommending and currently both precincts exist, the Desert Sky Precinct and the Tumbleweed Precinct. Sorry, excuse me. But we're recommending that we make this adjustment to align with the changes for, or the proposed changes for the Justice Court, which would be drawing the precinct right down the middle here, taking Desert Sky and taking it all the way from, I-10 up to the Thomas Road here and cutting in half this way. And then Tumbleweed would then take the eastern portion of this precinct and Desert Sky would take the western portion. Is there anything else going on here, Gary, that I may have missed?
You covered it all, Scott. It was perfect.
Great, thank you. So the next precinct is the Desi Precinct, and we have Goodyear Precinct on. So Desi's on the eastern portion of this change. Goodyear Precinct is on the western portion of this change. This precinct is in or borders on the cities of Goodyear and on the cities of Avondale, and it's at Dysart and MC 85. And it's really difficult to see the change here. I think we're talking, Gary described it to me, but one plot that is in the Goodyear precinct that actually in the city of Avondale. And so we're making the adjustment to this line to remove that plot that's currently in the city of Goodyear and keep it in the city in Avondale. Is that right, Gary? Did I describe that correctly?
It was 99% there, Scott. So in the Desi voting precinct, there is one parcel of land that's in the city of Goodyear. And so we're moving that. So you see how the Goodyear kind of has a little peninsula up that street there. To grab that parcel of land and pull it back into the Goodyear voting precinct. It's hard to talk about because it's the Goodyear voting precinct and there's an Avondale voting precinct and then city of Goodyear and city of Avondale. But the reason that one parcel of land is there is back in 2012, the Independent Redistricting Commission went in and drew their boundaries right through here and they orphaned off that parcel. And so we had to mirror that change. We're hoping that when the IRC is done with their congressional districts this time around, that they'll follow a different line. So we wouldn't have to go back and draw it where it was.
That actually brings up a good point. So the Independent Redistricting Commission, as they go through and they redraw those lines, they actually have to use a blank slate and they use grids. So they don't really reference back to the prior lines. So we're making assumptions that these congressional district and legislative district boundaries will change. And it's because of that, the fact that they have to start from a blank slate and that there's just been so much population growth. And then there's also the IRC uses census voting block data, which also helps then detail and direct where those lines potentially will go. And Gary's team has worked with the census to update those census block data. And so we're incorporating that as we've gone through and to help guide us where we think there could be potential the IRC lines, or at least where they won't draw them in the future. Is that right, Gary?
Yeah, we worked with the census over the last few years to try to improve the census block boundaries. And so we downloaded those census block boundaries earlier this year, at least for our current voting precincts as they are today. They've done a real nice job creating census block boundaries around those. But as we move these into new voting precincts with new boundaries, we'll just kind of take it one instance at a time to see how we can make it better.
So the next exhibit will cover Dobbins Ranch. And this is actually one of the areas that has gone through significant population growth. It's also in the Levine area. I think it has one of the higher number of total voters in District 5. So it's at the closest cross streets are 59th Avenue and Dobbins Road. It currently, as of early August, the current boundaries had 7,218 total voters. And we're recommending consideration for creating 2 additional voting precincts, Summerside Precinct and Desert Meadows Precinct. So currently Dobbins Ranch it overlaps that brand new 202 that was constructed since the 2018 voting precincts were approved, goes all the way up to baseline, then all the way down here south till it meets up with the 43rd Avenue. And so we're recommending that Desert Meadows, that new precinct, would then take that western portion, which is on the eastern portion of Desert Meadows, would then follow the 202 loop. Dobbins Ranch, the western portion of Dobbins Ranch would follow the 202 loop. And then it would take the north portion of the old Dobbins Ranch precinct, and then the Summerside would take the southern portion of that precinct. So as I mentioned, Dobbins Ranch had 7,218 total voters. It would drop that down to 2,408. Imagine there's probably still some room for growth there. Summerside, which is the southern portion of that, would take 2,286 voters of that total. Again, probably room for growth. And then the Desert Meadows, which is the western portion, would have 2,547 total voters. Any other changes here, Gary?
That was perfect explanation there, Scott. And there's definitely room for growth in all those areas, and it's definitely growing fast.
So the next exhibit will be for the Elwood Precinct. And this is a situation where the current boundaries are cutting through a home. And really the change is right here. There's in the image on the left, you can see the prior voting precinct line just had that little notch in it. And we're really squaring that off. Elwood is located in Tempe. It's north of Baseline and 48th Street. And how many houses are impacted here, Gary?
I took a look just a few minutes ago, and actually it goes just through some garage structures. So there's no voters affected, but there are a couple of garage structures that are affected.
And we will get to, as I mentioned early on, whenever we have a situation when we're cutting through homes or buildings, there's 2 precincts that impacted, Garden Groves, which will be a precinct we'll cover here in a few moments. So the next precinct is I think this is the Estrella Foothills Precinct. And this is another situation where we do have a precinct that's cutting through homes, but this is also an example of where we have multiple factors that are driving our recommendation for a change. And there has been significant growth in the Estrella Foothills precinct. So Estrella Foothills is in Goodyear and encompasses the Estrella Mountain Ranch area. And we're recommending, in addition to resolving the situation where the line is currently cutting through a home, making a new precinct, the Willis Precinct. So Estrella Foothills currently has 7,260 total voters. The Willis Precinct will then take the southern portion of the Estrella Foothills Precinct. The Estrella Foothills would then take the northern portion of that precinct. We would fix the situation where the precinct line is going through the boundaries. Here, I think that's Indian Springs Road, making an adjustment there. Gary will be able to describe exactly what's occurring. And then that would take, so Estrella Foothills would drop to 4,186 total voters. Willis would have 3,111 total voters. Anything else that I may be missing here, Gary?
That's a perfect description there, Scott. Even though, we dropped those into 2 voting precincts, there's a lot of mountains out here. There's still plenty of room for growth, but it's hard to kind of predict where they're going to be putting, new roads and things like that. You can kind of see how there's a lot of curved roads up here rather than the regular grid pattern that we're kind of used to. And so rather than trying to predict where, maybe we can cut it up a little bit differently, we try to take some straight lines right through, and that's how we did that. So in the future, I'm sure we're going to be cutting this up more. Where we were cutting through homes, I took a look at that just a few minutes ago. We're cutting through 1 home, and so this is actually going to affect a few voters. And then it's a kind of a longer stretch there, but there's 1 home that is directly cutting through, and the other ones are just some people's backyards. But there are about 5 voters that's affecting.
Then we will, when we get to the Warner exhibit, it'll be the other partner to this exhibit where the precinct was updated to address the line cutting through some homes. We're now going to the Garden Groves precinct, which is, we just covered the Elwood, I think 2 exhibits prior, and that had that little notch in it to address one single home that we were just squaring that notch out between the Elwood and the Garden Groves precinct. Again, this was located in Tempe, baseline at 48th Street. I don't think there was any other changes to the Garden Groves, just that one small change. Is that correct, Gary?
That's correct, Scott. Yeah, just have one very tiny change.
The next precinct, our exhibit will cover Gateway. And we did go over this change. I think it was our very first exhibit tonight with the Balls precinct. And it was to align this, the current voting lines with a justice court change, and really to follow this canal, taking it up to McDowell Road. That was the primary change for the Gateway precinct. Gateway is located Phoenix at 32nd Street in Roosevelt. Very few voters. It currently was at 3,875. And the new boundaries would be 3,870, so five fewer voters.
Yeah, and earlier I mentioned there was just 1 voter affected there. The numbers were pulled on about 2 to 3 weeks different. So just the change in voters over those couple of weeks is the, kind of the driver for those 5 voter difference.
So Goodyear precinct, this is, we went through the change related to Goodyear precinct when we discussed the Avondale precinct and really the Desi precinct with that 1 boundary that was coming up. And we made that 1 adjustment to move that plot back into the city of Goodyear that the congressional district boundaries had orphaned off into the city of Avondale.
And
Anything else for Goodyear?
one other thing, I think I forgot to mention when we previously covered it, that there was no voters affected with this change.
Thanks, Gary. So the next precinct is the Hayden High precinct. And this is also to align the precinct to the Justice Court change or Justice Court precinct. And here, the Hayden High is located in Phoenix along 35th Avenue and Van Buren are the closest cross streets. And we're actually recommending moving this this boundary from, I think that's 37th Avenue potentially.
That is correct, Scott.
37th Avenue, just a few, maybe 100 yards to the west to align with 39th Avenue. And that was really between the Maryvale Justice Court and the West McDowell Justice Court. Anything else here, Gary?
Yeah, that's all, Scott. Yeah, just that little move to align with 39th Avenue.
And I believe this precinct here is the Riverside Precinct, and we'll actually be going over that in a future exhibit. So the next precinct is the Hermosa Precinct. So the Hermosa Precinct is located in Phoenix at Broadway and 24th Street are the closest cross streets. And this is also to adjust a precinct boundary that was cutting through some homes. And it's actually at the northern portion of the Hermosa Precinct, right there. Do you know what street that is, Gary? It's up above Riverview Drive.
Yeah, and south of University, I don't know offhand.
Oh yeah, just south of University, south of I-10 as it comes through, close to that Broadway curve. And it's really just to straighten that out. Do we know how many homes were affected there, Gary?
Actually, this one was buildings rather than homes, but we still didn't like it going through those buildings. So there was one building it was cutting right through, and then through some other buildings, businesses, parking lots. Even though, voters don't register at businesses, but we still wanted to get that off of those buildings. And so there was no voters affected, but there was definitely one large building that was cutting through and some other parking lots that it was kind of weaving in between a little awkwardly.
Yeah, so no voters impacted by this change.
That's
And I
correct.
believe the very next exhibit is just the northern portion of that exact same change. The Hilton voting precinct, which is to the north of that. And it's to address that same situation right there north of Riverview, south of University, to prevent that voting precinct from cutting through those buildings. So we'll go to the next exhibit will be the Levine Meadows voting precinct. This is to address population growth and the total number of registered voters that are in the current precincts. This is, as the name would suggest, in Levine. It's the closest cross streets are Southern and Loop 202. And there are currently in Levine Meadows 6,938 total voters. We're recommending creating a new precinct, which would be Trailside Precinct. So the current Levine Meadows would take the eastern portion of the precinct. The new precinct Trailside would take the western portion of the precinct. And then that would leave Levine Meadows with 2,801 voters, a decrease of just over 4,000. And then those 4,145 total voters would then be moved to Trailside. I imagine actually there's still probably room for growth in both of those precincts. Is that correct, Gary?
Yeah, there's definitely room for growth in those areas. It's still growing fast. And
anything that I may have missed from the description of those changes?
it was perfect description there, Scott.
And we had talked about, a few exhibits back, the Desert Meadows, Dobbins Ranch, Summerside. So you can just see lots of growth here in this area of District 5. So the next voting precinct is the Lonesome voting precinct. This is located in Phoenix and really where the Loop 101 meets I-10. And this is to adjust the voting precinct to align with the Justice Court precinct changes or proposed changes. And I believe the primary change here is just to move the boundary. You could see Lonesome was really cutting over there into the Pena precinct, and to move that line to align with 91st Avenue, make that straight. Any other changes, Gary?
No, that's the only one on Lonesome there's got is to align to that major road, 91st Avenue, rather than cutting through those neighborhoods like you had mentioned.
So the next exhibit is actually the partner exhibit to the Lonesome change, and that's the Pena change. So as we can see from the exhibit here on the left, that portion that was coming into Pena from Lonesome has been moved further to the west to align with 91st Avenue. And, I might as well tell you how many voters are impacted here by these changes. So Lonesome had 3,346. It's taking that to 2,215. And then Pena had 2,983. And it will have 4,109, which is still significantly lower than 5,000. Is Pena nearing build out here, Gary? Do you recall?
It is nearing build out. If it's, I believe it possibly could be built out, and in the northeast section there, I believe there's some businesses or maybe some apartment complexes. I don't recall, but I believe it is completely built out, or if not, very close to it.
So the next precinct we'll cover exhibit is the Riverside Precinct. This is the partner exhibit to the Hayden High Precinct, which we covered. And it was to adjust the precinct to align with the Justice Court precinct changes. And it's here towards the northeastern portion of the Riverside Precinct. And it's just to bring that precinct line to align with 39th Avenue. I think that was the 37th Avenue where it was aligning with. And very few voters are impacted there. It does take Riverside from 5,009 to 4,855. And this is located in Phoenix at 35th Avenue and Van Buren, just south of the I-10. Any other changes here, Gary?
That's the only one there, Scott. So yeah, just along 39th Avenue there.
The next exhibit will be for the Roma Precinct, and this is to as a result of increase in population and in voter totals. So the Roma Precinct is, and we're recommending creating a new precinct, the West Wind Precinct. Roma is currently located in Phoenix at 91st Avenue and Camelback. It's just south of the Cardinal Stadium. So there are currently in Roma 5,801 total voters. This change of adding West Wind, which would be to then take the eastern portion of the precinct. West Wind would have 4,152 voters. Imagine that's probably fairly built out. Roma now would then have 1,643 total voters. Any other changes here, Gary?
That's the only change. And as you mentioned, with Roma only having a little over 1,000 voters, that subdivision that you see there is not even close to being built out. And so it'll be building out in the next year or two to fill that in to get us closer to 5,000.
So we have just 3 more exhibits to cover. So Stump Precinct, which we did reference earlier on in one of our other exhibits. The Stump Precinct is in Tolleson, 91st Avenue and Broadway. And this is as a result of increased population in the total number of voters. Stump currently has 7,997 total voters. We're recommending creating a Forest Grove precinct, which would take the northern or northeastern portion of the Stump precinct. And the Forest Grove precinct would then have 4,402. That would leave Forest Grove with 3,601 total voters. Any other changes occurring with Stump?
No, that's it. And I did want to mention on that Forest Grove, we weren't able to take a major street there, but even with Forest Grove having over 4,000 voters, we didn't want to go all the way down to Broadway Road. So there's a green belt right there where you see that Forest Grove boundary. Just another one of those places where we try to cut things along, that's what we mentioned before, canals and major roads, but there's a green belt right there that we're cutting along.
Yeah, and adding Broadway would have put you probably close to 5,000, and then there's still more growth here.
Yeah.
Next precinct is the Tumbleweed voting precinct. This is to align the precinct with a Justice Court precinct. We already covered a portion of this change when we discussed the Desert Sky. It's really splitting the Desert Sky and the Tumbleweed to align with the 75th Avenue line instead of that middle boundary. I think that's following Canto Boulevard. So for Tumbleweed, it currently had 4,366. This would take it to 5,540. I do imagine it's probably pretty well built out.
It is well built out, Scott, and having over the 5,000 is kind of our threshold, our marker, but a lot of times we can't have a perfect voting precinct. We do our best to get around the 5,000 mark, but we'll find some that are above the 5,000 threshold and then below the 5,000 as well.
And the very last exhibit that we will cover today is the Warner Precinct, and we did cover a portion of this when we discussed the Shreya Foothills change. So this is in Goodyear, the cross streets for the Warner Precinct, or it's actually in Avondale. And the cross streets are Lower Buckeye and Avondale Road. And it's really to align to adjust this line here that is going through some buildings or some homes right there along Indian Springs.
And I did want to mention also, Scott, the Quentin voting precinct that we created up on the north side of that, between
that's
Lower
right.
Buckeye and Buckeye Road.
So, oh yeah, the Quentin voting precinct. So Warner does have 5,799 total, does have a lot of room for growth. So by creating the Quentin, our precinct right here towards the top, Quentin would have 3,658 total voters, a lot of voters right there, a little tiny square. And then the remaining precinct, Warner, would have 2,154, a lot of room for future growth. So any other changes here, Gary?
Yeah, you covered it there, Scott. It's perfect.
So that is our last exhibit, and want to touch base with Megan. Do we have any questions?
Hi, Scott. We had a question wondering if these exhibits would be posted on the website, and we let them know that the slides, exhibits, and presentation recording will be posted on the website, but if they wanted to get it sooner, they can email us at voterinfo@risk.Maricopa.Vote. In addition, there's one question, Scott, that I'd like you to answer. Jay Brooks asked us if the precinct process is tied to the number of voting locations. For example, does one precinct equal one voting location?
And so what's great about the precincts is they do allow us to identify where voting locations could be. But because of the pandemic in 2020, Maricopa County actually used a vote center model. And we were able to use precinct data to help us identify where those potential vote center models are, where those vote center locations would occur. And the changes that we're going through and making right now will provide the board the flexibility to use vote centers or a precinct-based model in the future. Those decisions about using a vote center model will occur later in the spring as we get closer to the 2020 election cycle. But there is not necessarily a direct correlation between the number of voting precincts and the number of locations. Even when we had, so in 2018, we had 748 total voting precincts. Usually we capped out at around in Maricopa County 500 total voting locations. In those instances would use co-located precincts or co-located voting locations within 2 or more precincts. So if there are no other questions, I think we can go to our closing remarks. So Judge Uberman, do you have any closing remarks for us?
I just want to say thank you for everyone who participated. And that if you have any observations or any comments, we look forward to hearing those. Thank you.
Judge Russell?
You know, Scott, I wanted to say thank you to both Megan and Gary. They have done a great job over the last, this is the 5th meeting that we've had in all of those meetings. But I also need to say thank you to you. Anybody who's tried to do the job that Scott has been doing in each one of these meetings knows it's not an easy job. You have done a great job. You have really been stellar. Thank you for letting us be part of the presentation. Thank you, everybody who's participated in all of these meetings.
Well, thank you, Judge Russell. It's been a great 5 days. I really enjoy the opportunity to touch base, provide this information to the community, the public, to give them the information. We want to be as transparent as possible as we go through and as the board considers these changes, to provide every opportunity for the community to give us feedback and input. And before I close it out, do we still have Supervisor Gallardo online? Maybe he had to fall out. Well, with that, just want to encourage everyone to take advantage of our website and provide us that input if you do have a concern or if you have a recommendation for us to consider as we move forward. So thank you all and have a good evening.